Right. Guys, see my screen now with the slideshow and all? Hopefully. All right. So, morning, we are picking up the study of King David, First Kings of Israel. We've gone through Saul, we've gone through David. This is part 10. I think we might do one more after this just to kind of get into the life of Solomon a little bit, but we'll probably wrap up this kind of series we've been doing. But in this study, we're doing something just a little bit different where we read through a large section of scripture and just let the text do most of the speaking. I do make some comments and all, and we do, have some discussion and all, but primarily we're just reading the text just to, get it in our minds, to kind of get that history in our minds and to go through it. A lot of times in, at least in our culture of church today, we, spend most of the time in the New Testament, the things of Jesus, the epistles, that type of thing. And sometimes we neglect the Old Testament. So I think it's important to jump in sometimes and just spend some time reading the Old Testament, those scriptures. That's what the early Christians, primarily would have had to read and been familiar with, since a lot of them were even living before all of what we know as the Bible had been fully written. So what we're picking up today is the story of King David after he had to flee Jerusalem when Absalom had conspired to take the throne from him. That's kind of where we left off last time. So let's see here. So just to refresh you a little bit on King David's family. So we had, his list of wives over here on the left-hand side, and then his list of children. I think I've got these essentially in order of how, what the sons were born, at least the second to the column to the left. As far as like the concubines and their children, I don't know that we exactly know all of the order of when they were born. But anyway, we had Amnon, Daniel, Absalom, and Adonijah were the top four in order of birth. So obviously there's some drama we saw with that. I think at this point, of the story, Amnon, the first one, he was already been murdered by Absalom, as we read about. Daniel, he was the second born. He's really only mentioned in the genealogy, which leads some to conclude that he probably died before reaching adulthood, or for some other reason, he's just not even mentioned as, like a character in the story, really. He's just mentioned as kind of one of the genealogies. So Absalom, being third born, at this point is presumably the next in line to take the throne. But as we saw last time, rather than respect his father David, he sought to usurp the throne by turning the people against his father, who was the king, being David. So that's got to be a really tough thing for David to have worked through, rather than, his own son, his own child that should have been supporting his father and, learning from him how to be a good king, is, just going off the rails and attempting to, commit treason. Well, actually, he did commit treason. He's attempting to take the throne from David permanently. Okay, so we're going to pick up in 2 Samuel chapter 17, verse 1. So if you've got your Bible, read along. I've got to have it up on the screen for you. And I'm just reading from the New American Standard Bible today. But any translation you got should be good. So follow along. Let me grab a little water real quick. And so verse 1 of chapter 17. Furthermore, Ahithophel said to Absalom, "Please let me choose 12,000 men that I may arise and pursue David tonight. I will come upon him while he is weary and exhausted and terrify him, so that all the people who are with him will flee. Then I will strike down the king alone, and I will bring back all the people to you. The return of everyone depends on the man you seek. Then all the people will be at peace." So the plan pleased Absalom and all the elders of Israel. But Absalom said, "Let us now call Hushai the Archite also, and let us hear what he has to say." When Hushai had come to Absalom, Absalom said to him, "Ahithophel has spoken thus. Shall we carry out his plan? If not, you speak." So Hushai said to Absalom, "This time the advice that Ahithophel has given is not good." However, Hushai said, "You know that your father and his men, that they are mighty men and they are fierce. like a bear robbed of her cubs in the field. And your father is an expert in warfare and will not spend the night with the people. Behold, he has now hidden himself in one of the caves or in another place. And it will be when he falls on them at the first attack that whoever hears it will say, there has been a slaughter among the people who follow Absalom. And even one who is valiant, whose heart is like the heart of a lion, will completely lose heart. For all Israel knows that your father is a mighty man, and those who are with him are valiant. But I counsel that all Israel be surely gathered to you, from Dan even to Beersheba, as the sand that is by the sea in abundance, and that you will personally go into battle, so that we shall come to him in one of the places where he can be found, and he will fall, and we will fall on him as the dew falls on the ground, and on him and all the men who are with him. Not even one will be left. If he withdraws into a city, then all Israel shall bring ropes to that city. We will drag it into the valley until not even a small stone is found there. Then Absalom and all the men of Israel said, the counsel of Hushai the Archite is better than the counsel of Ahithophel. For the Lord had ordained to thwart the good counsel of Ahithophel, so that the Lord might bring calamity on Absalom. Okay, so Ahithophel was one of David's former advisors. He then had joined Absalom against David, and here we saw kind of how he had advised to Absalom how he should overthrow David. However, as we previously saw as well, David sent one of his friends, Hushai, to pretend to be against David and to work for Absalom, but secretly he is going to be a bad advisor to Absalom. And in this section, we see Hushai, who, he's secretly here working to subvert the plans of Ahithophel and Absalom in their quest to kill David. And we see him here giving some different advice. Again, this might seem a little bit familiar, as David previously, as we've read about in our sessions, had a long history of those that were close to him seeking to kill him. And again, here it's with his son and even one of his former counselors. So I think what's interesting here to note in this passage, though, is that this plan to bring calamity on Absalom by thwarting the counsel of Ahithophel, it's said to be ordained by the Lord, Yahweh. And this seems to be the narrator of this text pointing out that through everything that's going on, all this chaos, God is still working to bring about his plan, even when there's plenty of evil men that are working against it. So that's kind of seems to be this continuing storyline that keeps coming up, is that God keeps working through people, and people try to fight against him. They try to stop it, but God's still at work, and he's protecting those people that he wants to remain in the places he wants them to be. Okay, so moving on, verse 15. Then Hushai said to Zadok and to Abiathar the priests, this is what Ahithophel counseled Absalom and the elders of Israel, and this is what I have counseled. Now therefore send quickly and tell David, saying, do not spend the night at the fords of the wilderness, but by all means cross over, or else the king and all the people who are with him will be destroyed. Now Jonathan and Ahimaaz were staying at Enrogel, and a maidservant would go and tell them, and they would go and tell King David, for they could not be seen entering the city. But a lad did see them and told Absalom, so the two of them departed quickly and came to the house of a man in Bahuriam, who had a well in his courtyard, and they went into it. And the woman took a covering and spread it over the well's mouth, and scattered grain on it, so that nothing was known. Then Absalom's servants came to the woman at the house and said, where are Ahimaaz and Jonathan? And the woman said to them, they have crossed the brook of water. And when they searched, they could not find them. And they returned to Jerusalem. It came about that after they had departed, that they came up out of the well and went and told King David. And they said to David, arise and cross over the waters quickly, for thus Ahithophel has counseled against you. Then David and all the people who were with him arose and crossed the Jordan, and by dawn not even one remained who had not crossed the Jordan. Now when Ahithophel saw that his counsel was not followed, he saddled his donkey and arose and went to his home, to his city, and set his house in order, and strangled himself. Thus he died and was buried in the grave of his father. Okay, so a lot going on here, but essentially, the counsel is being relayed to David by a series of people passing on this message to get him information from Jerusalem. Very dangerous being a spy. But David, in the end, is warned by his loyal friends and servants who diligently served him by spying on Absalom's plans, and they reported it to him. Ahithophel, David's prior counselor who had turned against him, when he gives this advice and he finds out that it's not been heeded, he goes and he sets his house in order and kills himself. So this is presumably because he realized that without his advice being listened to and followed, that David's going to prevail, and then Ahithophel, being a traitor, he's going to be killed for treason against David, the king. And so he's, wanting to avoid that, obviously. All right, moving on. Chapter 18, verse 1. Then David commanded the people who were with him and set over them commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds. David sent the people out, 1/3 under the command of Joab, 1/3 under the command of Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, and 1/3 under the command of Ittai the Gittite. And the king said to the people, I myself will surely go out with you also. But the people said, you should not go, for if we indeed flee, they will not care about us. Even if half of us die, they will not care about us. But you are worth 10,000 of us. Therefore, now it is better that you be ready to help us from the city. And the king said to them, whatever seems best to you, I will do. So the king stood beside the gate, and all the people went out by hundreds and thousands. The king charged Joab and Abishai and Ittai, saying, deal gently for my sake with the young man Absalom. And all the people heard when the king charged all the commanders concerning Absalom. So here we see David. Again, he's this great warrior. He's been through tons of battles previously. He's been, a very victorious military leader. Obviously, with this going on, it's a little bit different, but he still has a lot of loyal people that are serving him. So he does prepare for battle. He sets 3 different commanders, each over 1/3 of the men. And what's really interesting here is, even with all of this, with Absalom trying to kill him, who's usurping the throne, who is, being quite evil, David still asks his military commanders, he didn't even ask them, he, charged them, which is basically a commandment or an order from a military leader, to deal gently with Absalom. So you see David here, his heart, he still cares about his son. He does not just want him killed. But, obviously they do need to defend themselves against this army that's going to try to come and kill all of them. Okay. Verse 6, then the people went out to the field against Israel, and the battle took place in the forest of Ephraim. The people of Israel were defeated there before the servants of David, and the slaughter there that day was great, 20,000 men. For the battle was spread over the whole countryside, and the forest devoured more people that day than the sword devoured. Now Absalom happened to meet the servants of David, for Absalom was riding on his mule, and the mule went under the thick branches of a great oak, and his head caught fast in the oak, so that he was left hanging between heaven and earth, while that mule that was under him kept going. When a certain man saw it, he told Joab and said, behold, I saw Absalom hanging in an oak. Okay, so this is almost just, comical. It's in a sense, it's so bizarre. But as the battle between Absalom and the people of Israel that were with King David, as that's taking place, David and his men again proved to be victorious. This is great defeat over the army of Israel that was under Absalom. And Absalom doesn't really say, but presuming since there's this great defeat that he's probably retreating, or he's, going back to regroup or something like that. He's riding his mule, assuming he's probably going fairly fast by what happens here, but he's riding along and he gets his, aforementioned large and beautiful hair. We previously read that, he had some of the, nicest hair anyone had ever had, and he would cut it and weigh it. And it was this, this great thing to him of how much pride he had in his hair. But anyway, he gets this beautiful hair caught in a branch of a tree, and his mule keeps on going. So he's left there just hanging by his hair, and there's, not much he can do. He's just, essentially hanging there in a tree by his hair, probably very painful, pretty humiliating for anyone that's going to come across him as well. So it's kind of a poetic justice that him being so prideful, so arrogant, and, having, trying to seek this throne and usurping it that he shouldn't have been. And now he gets caught by his hair, and he's just left out there hanging in a tree. All right. Verse 11, then Joab said to the man who had told him, now behold, you saw him. Why then did you not strike him there to the ground? And I would have given you 10 pieces of silver and a belt. The man said to Joab, even if I should receive 1,000 pieces of silver in my hand, I would not put out my hand against the king's son. For in our hearing, the king charged you and Abishai and Ittai, saying, protect for me the young man Absalom. Otherwise, if I had dealt treacherously against his life, and there is nothing hidden from the king, then you yourself would have stood aloof. Then Joab said, I will not waste time here with you. So he took 3 spears in his hand, and he thrust them through the heart of Absalom while he was yet alive in the midst of the oak. And 10 young men who carried Joab's armor gathered around and struck Absalom and killed him. Then Joab blew the trumpet, and the people returned from pursuing Israel, for Joab restrained the people. They took Absalom and they cast him into a deep pit in the forest and erected over him a very great heap of stones, and all Israel fled, each to his tent. So again here, Joab, and Joab is, this mighty military leader as well, but he once again did not listen to the instruction of David the king, who had asked him to be gentle with Absalom. So Joab, with the help of his close men, he killed Absalom and he buried him. So, this is not the first time that Joab killed someone, even though it went against David's wishes. And then, we read once Absalom's killed, the Israelites that were following him, they all fled back to their own tents, and essentially, they blow the trumpet and the people stop pursuing them. And it seems like it's another great victory for David's men over Absalom and his men that were trying to seek their lives. Okay, so then skipping down a little bit, we're going to go to chapter 18, verse 31 to 33. Behold, the Cushite arrived, and the Cushite said, let the Lord, the king, receive good news, for the Lord has freed you this day from the hand of all those who rose against you. And the king said to the Cushite, is it well with the young man Absalom? And the Cushite answered, let the enemies of my lord the king and all those who rise up against you for evil be as that young man. The king was deeply moved and went up to the chamber over the gate and wept. And thus he said as he walked, O my son Absalom, my son Absalom, would I had died instead of you. O Absalom, my son, my son. So here David is told what's supposed to be good news, but upon hearing this news of Absalom's defeat and death, he was emotionally moved and he wept. So on the one hand, while his enemy had been defeated, who was trying to kill David, that must have been, a relief to David in one sense that his enemies, been stopped, his life and, that of his other close family is not in danger at this point anymore. But yet this was his son. And this is still a very sad day for David because, it says here that he wanted him to have died instead of Absalom. So, being that it was his own child, it's a very emotional and tough time for David. And I think, again, we've seen this repeated in David's life, but David had a lot of situations that were very difficult life situations. And a lot of it with his family and the drama between his different wives and their different children and his, prior drama with Saul and all that. So, yeah, it's just a tough time for David. You get the sense that while he was this great king and he probably had a lot of things going for him and a lot of comforts being king, he just, his whole life was, a lot of trouble and a lot of wars and a lot of battles and a lot of people out to get him all the time. So now we're going to skip ahead a little bit more. So 1 Kings chapter 1. We're going to kind of skip to a little bit later on. Now, King David was old, advanced in age, and they covered him with clothes, but he could not keep warm. So his servant said to him, "Let them seek a young virgin for my lord the king, and let her attend the king and become his nurse, and let her lie in your bosom, that the lord the king may keep warm." So they searched for a beautiful girl throughout all the territory of Israel. They found Abishag the Shunammite and brought her to the king. The girl was very beautiful, and she became the king's nurse and served him, but the king did not cohabit with her. Now Adonijah, the son of Haggith, exalted himself, saying, "I will be king." So he prepared for himself chariots and horsemen with 50 men to run before him. His father had never crossed him at any time by asking, "Why have you done so?" And he was also a very handsome man, and he was born after Absalom. He had conferred with Joab, the son of Zeruiah, and with Abiathar the priest, and following Adonijah, they helped him. But Zadok the priest and Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, Nathan the prophet, Shemaiah, Ray, and the mighty men who belonged to David were not with Adonijah. Adonijah sacrificed sheep and oxen and fatlings by the stone of Zeholeth, which is beside En Rogel. And he invited all his brothers, the king's sons, and all the men of Judah, the king's servants. But he did not invite Nathan the prophet, Benaiah, the mighty men, and Solomon his brother. Then Nathan spoke to Bathsheba, the mother of Solomon, saying, "Have you not heard that Adonijah, the son of Haggith, has become king, and David our Lord does not know it? So now come, please let me give you counsel and save your life and the life of your son Solomon. Go at once to King David and say to him, 'Have you not, my lord, O king, sworn to your maidservant, saying, surely Solomon your son shall be king after me, and he shall sit on my throne? Why then has Adonijah become king? Behold, while you are still there speaking with the king, I will come in after you and confirm your words.'" So as David's reached the end of his life, he naturally becomes weaker. It seems a little strange here, but his servants sought a young, and specifically notes a beautiful woman, to be a nurse that would be there for David, who would just lie with him to keep him warm. Especially seems strange since David had multiple wives. Perhaps this indicates he didn't have a very close relationship with any of his wives, if they wanted to be with him in his old age, to help nurse him or anything like that. Anyway, moving on from that, naturally the question of who would supersede David as king would have arisen. So we've got here Adonijah, who's David's fourth oldest son. And it's assumed here that since Amnon and Absalom have been previously killed and Daniel is nowhere mentioned, it indicates he's probably not likely in the picture at this point. So Adonijah's being fourth youngest, or the fourth eldest son, would be, traditionally next in line to be king. Also, Adonijah was said to be a very handsome man, and he took steps to put himself in a place to be the next king. However, several key people in David's cabinet, they were not consulted, and they were not in approval of him. Also, Solomon's left out of things here. So we see here Nathan, he decided to take some action. He spoke to Bathsheba and counseled her on how to approach David and speak to him about this situation that's taking place. Starting at verse 15 here now. So Bathsheba went into the king in the bedroom. Now the king was very old, and Abishag the Shunammite was ministering to the king. Then Bathsheba bowed and prostrated herself to the king, and the king said, "What do you wish?" She said to him, "My lord, you swore to your maidservant by the Lord your God, saying, Surely your son Solomon shall be king after me, and he shall sit on my throne. Now behold, Adonijah is king, and now, my lord the king, you do not know it. He has sacrificed oxen and fatling and sheep in abundance, and he has invited all the sons of the king, and Abiathar the priest, and Joab the commander of the army, but he has not invited Solomon your servant. As for you now, my lord the king, the eyes of all Israel are on you, to tell them who shall sit on the throne of my lord the king after him. Otherwise, it will come about as soon as my lord the king sleeps with his fathers, that I and my son Solomon will be considered offenders. Behold, while she was still speaking with the king, Nathan the prophet came in. They told the king, saying, Here is Nathan the prophet. And when he came in before the king, he prostrated himself before the king and with his face to the ground. And Nathan said, My lord the king, have you said, Adonijah shall be king after me, and he shall sit on my throne? For he has gone down today and has sacrificed oxen and fatling and sheep in abundance, and has invited all the king's sons and all the commanders of the army and Abiathar the priest. And behold, they are eating and drinking before him, and they say, Long live King Adonijah. But me, even your servant, and Zadok the priest, and Benaiah, and the son of Jehoiada, and your servant Solomon, he is not invited. Has this thing been done by the Lord the king? And have you shown to your servants who should sit on the throne of my lord the king after him? Then King David said, Call Bathsheba to me. And she came into the king's presence and stood before the king. And the king bowed and said, As the Lord lives, who has redeemed my life from all distress, surely as I vowed to you by the Lord, the God of Israel, saying, Your son Solomon shall be king after me, and he shall sit on my throne in my place. I will indeed do so this day. Okay, so a lot going on here again, but Bathsheba followed Nathan's instruction, went in to remind David that Solomon was to be king, and let him know that Adonijah was making the claim of the throne again while David is still alive. Nathan, also brought to attention that Adonijah was claiming the throne for himself. And David here, vowed to Bathsheba that Solomon would indeed be the next king. So a lot more family drama apparently going on here for King David. All right, so 1 Kings 2, chapter 2, verse 1. As David's time to die drew near, he charged Solomon his son, saying, I am going the way of all the earth. Be strong, therefore, and show yourself a man. Keep the charge of the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, to keep his statutes, his commandments, his ordinances, and his testimonies, according to what is written in the law of Moses, that you may succeed in all that you do and wherever you turn, so that the Lord may carry out his promise, which he spoke concerning me, saying, If your sons are careful of the way to walk before me in truth with all their heart and with all their soul, you shall not lack a man on the throne of Israel. Now you also know what Joab, the son of Zeruiah, did to me, and what he did to the two commanders of the armies of Israel, to Abner, the son of Ner, and to Amasa, the son of Jether, whom he killed. He also shed the blood of war in peace, and he put the blood of war on his belt, about his waist, and on his sandals on his feet. So act according to your wisdom, and do not let his gray hair go down to Sheol in peace. But show kindness to the sons of Barzillai, the Gilead, and let them be among those who eat at your table. For they assisted me when I fled from Absalom, your brother. Behold, there is with you Shimei, the son of Jerah, the Benjamite of Bahurim. Now it was he who cursed me with a violent curse on the day I went to Mahanaim. But when he came down to me at the Jordan, I swore to him by the Lord, saying, I will not put you to death with the sword. Now therefore, do not let him go unpunished, for you are a wise man, and you will know what you ought to do to him. And you will bring down his gray hair to Sheol with blood. Then David slept with his fathers and was buried in the city of David. And the days of David reigned over Israel were 40 years. 7 years he reigned at Hebron, and 33 years he reigned in Jerusalem. And Solomon sat on the throne of David his father, and his kingdom was firmly established. Okay, so David did follow through and made sure that Solomon was indeed made the king. I want to point out here that he also gave Solomon some advice to be a good king and a good man. Specifically, he told him to walk in the Lord's ways and to keep his statutes, commandments, ordinances, and testimonies, which were given through Moses. David also mentioned some of the people who he believed should receive justice for their actions. So I think it's interesting here to see that David realized that there was wrong that was committed that he as king did not administer justice for. So he passed that along to Solomon to handle it in his wisdom. Joab was one of those that David suggested Solomon to exact justice upon. Joab had on multiple occasions killed someone that David did not want him to kill. And David, for some reason, was unwilling to hold him accountable and punish him for it. We've kind of speculated on that. Maybe it's because Joab was his, part of his family. He didn't want to cause more family drama. We're not really sure, but for some reason, David didn't hold Joab accountable when he should have, but he's now letting Solomon know that he should serve justice. We've got now Solomon taking the throne. I think it's especially, though, important to see that David, at the end of his life, he's had this long reign as a king, very difficult life. And as he's letting Solomon know how to take over this throne and how he should do things, the important lessons that he's teaching him is to essentially follow God, keep the commandments of God, and do what was written in the law of Moses. So at the end of his life, David realizes that the best thing to do as a king is to follow God and his rules and his commands and to walk in his ways. And I think that's a really important lesson that can carry on to us even as well, as goes for anyone in life. If you want to do well, if you want to do the right things, then follow God and his ways. So definitely David made that point to his son Solomon here, though, and it's recorded. Okay, so we're going to wrap it up. Just a real quick summary, kind of what we've gone over. Just going to make a few last minute points here. So David, as we've seen, had a very dramatic life and a lot of family drama with his family dynamic. He previously had his life sought to be ended by the king Saul, his father-in-law, then later Ishbosheth, his brother-in-law, and then later his own son, Absalom. Through all of this, David continued, though, to be committed to God. And I think that's an example to us that how we can continue to seek God even when everything around us is falling apart, seems to be going bad, seems like everyone's out to get us. At the end of the day, we still should just continue to be committed to God and seek his ways no matter what. As David's life neared the end, so he'd been king 7 years of Judah, 33 years of king of all Israel. We then see another one of his sons, Adonijah, tried to usurp the throne again. So just a continued thing here. So David's family just did not get along very well, apparently. But David took action to ensure that Solomon would be the one to take the throne after him. And I think the most important point here, what stands out to me the most, is that David gave Solomon some very specific instructions and warnings for him to diligently follow the Lord God and his commandments as given by Moses. And I think this really indicates the heart of David and that he understood the importance of following God's rules in order to be a good leader. It also shows that even late in life, David was still this faithful follower of God. He didn't turn away. This is, one of the last things he's doing. He still realizes that the most important thing in life is following God, serving him, and he's passing that on to his son. So at the end of this, we've gone through a lot of stuff about David. While we realize he wasn't a perfect man or a perfect king, he's still presented throughout Scripture as this faithful servant of God. David, even though he made some mistakes, he continued to be willing to submit to God and seek him again and again. So I think, and the Bible's full of stories like this, people following God and seeking him and doing the right thing. That's what every person should be doing. It's what we should be doing. Seek God and his ways. So I'm going to go ahead and end the slideshow. I'll end the recording. If you didn't get to be live with us, we hope you join us next time. And yeah, we will go from there. So we'll open some things up for discussion here in a minute.